Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Communities in Saskatchewan are still grieving following the vicious knife attacks which left 11 people dead and 19 others injured. Interim Conservative leader Candice Bergen says she will not be seeking re-election. We chat with political reporter Brian Lilly on why she's leaving the public life. And it is back to school for so many students across the country. BCN's Micah Quinn caught up with some in post-secondaries who discussed the challenges they may face this fall.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The country is still in shock following stabbing attacks which left 11 people dead and 19 others injured. The attacks took place on the James Smith Cree Nation and in nearby Weldon, Saskatchewan. RCMP say one of the two suspects in the stabbing rampage, Damian Sanderson, was found dead. The body of the 31-year-old was discovered on the reserve. His brother, 30-year-old Miles Sanderson, is the second suspect, and police say he is still at large.
His body was located outdoors in a heavily grassed area in proximity to a house that was being examined. We can confirm he has visible injuries. These injuries are not believed to be self-inflicted at this point. The exact cause of death will be determined in conjunction with the Saskatchewan Coroner's Office, with the date and time for that examination to be determined. Miles Sanderson, Damian's brother, may have sustained injuries. This has not been confirmed. But we do want the public to know this because there is a possibility he may seek medical attention.
Leaders of the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations are begging those with knowledge or information of Miles Sanderson's exact whereabouts to come forward to help end this tragedy without any more loss of life. Meanwhile, in the village of Weldon, Saskatchewan, Ruby Works stopped by to place flowers outside of the home of one of the stabbing fatalities. The victim was identified as 77-year-old Wes Pedersen. Works says the knife attacks have simply shattered her community.
It's just a shock. When I got the Amber Alert saying there was one in Weldon, and when my auntie told me, she told my younger sister told me, she said, don't freak out, don't scream. I hit the ground, I collapsed and hit the ground. I known him since I was just a little girl. He was a kind man in Weldon. My mind is somewhere else. It's a shock. No one in this town is going to never sleep again.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe offered his thoughts and prayers to the many families impacted by the tragedy in his province. He did so while working from the field.
This loss caused by these evil, vicious, senseless attacks, and all of Saskatchewan agrees with you, but we must do more than that. We must turn our attention to what is needed now. First, care and support for the victims and their families. Those who were injured continue to receive the very best possible care in a number of different hospitals. The province's victim services was deployed to the area yesterday. The local school has set up a center for those who need services, and I would encourage anyone to reach out to access those services. Prince Albert Grand Council and the Health Authority will provide social supports now and in the weeks to come. I have spoken with many people who are directly impacted by these horrific attacks, and with the leadership of the RCMP, James Smith Cree Nation, and the FSIN on how the province can support these efforts.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau condemned the knife attacks which took place in Saskatchewan on Sunday. He says the vicious assaults were shocking and heartbreaking.
This kind of violence, or any kind of violence, has no place in our country. We're still, of course, monitoring the situation closely, and we urge everyone to follow all the updates from the authorities. The priority is keeping you and your loved ones safe, so please be careful. If you see anything, if you have any information, please call 911 to share that. I reached out to the James Smith Cree Nation leadership earlier today, had a good conversation with the chiefs. I also spoke with Premier Moe of Saskatchewan to highlight that the federal government will be there with the resources necessary right now in this time of crisis, but also will continue to work as partners in the weeks, months, and years to come through grieving and healing.
A 27-year-old Alberta man has died following a stabbing outside of a Banff nightclub over the weekend. Police say they received a 911 call about a Foothills County man in distress at the bar on Banff Avenue early on Saturday. He was taken to hospital but later died. 20-year-old John Sproul of Lake County, BC was charged with second-degree murder. Now, RCMPs say they do not believe the incident is related to another fight at a bar in Banff, which left a 26-year-old resident of the town dead. A 22-year-old man has been charged with second-degree murder from that attack. The government of Alberta announced that Indigenous and municipal communities in the province can now apply for a one-time grant of up to $30,000. The funding will develop a business model for their own self-administered police service. The money will help groups to prepare a business case outlining local needs, capital requirements, and transition considerations. If Alberta moves forward with a provincial police force, officials say the government will work with First Nations and municipalities to ensure local police services have more resources and give Albertans more of a say in setting policing priorities. Many students went back to school today. Now, the province says it is creating the Premier's Council on Skills to help ensure students learn the skills they need to help secure Alberta's future. Premier Jason Kenney says apprenticeship training is vital to the success of our province. He says the government will be working alongside a number of industries to ensure success for our students.
This task force, the Premier's Skills Task Force, will bridge the gap between industry, government, and education institutions, including at least one member from industries in each of the following areas: ag and forestry, tourism, construction, of course the energy sector, technology, aviation, aerospace and logistics, finance and fintech, that's financial technology, and the health industry. Because obviously we has strategies to address the current and pending shortage of healthcare workers.
Alberta's opposition party is calling on the UCP government to immediately re-index AISH to inflation to help some of our province's most vulnerable. The NDP critic for Community and Social Services, Marie Renaud, says the government has to stop cutting the assured income for the severely handicapped.
And just last week, Jason Nixon and the UCP made the deliberate choice to keep cutting AISH. The UCP is bragging about a surplus they did absolutely nothing to create, even while the most vulnerable Albertan families are struggling to buy food and keep a roof over their head. Finance Minister Jason Nixon even had the audacity to suggest that indexing AISH could make inflation worse. Think about that for a second. The UCP thinks that denying people groceries is how to control inflation.
I have a very hard time making ends meet. My life is very unpredictable because you never know what costs will be cut next. Jason Kenney promised more than once that he would not de-index AISH. His government never kept that promise. We all know the cost of living has increased drastically. I cannot live in my building if I don't have insurance. My tenant insurance has almost doubled. Utilities are skyrocketing. Food prices are rising. Everything is out of reach.
Interim Conservative leader Candice Bergen says she will stay on as a member of Parliament for now, but will not be running in the next federal election. We asked political reporter Brian Lilly why the popular Manitoba MP is stepping away from public life.
Well, after 14 years, she thinks it's time. Now, she also wanted to make sure that she got this news out that she won't be running in the next election before the leadership vote is announced. She doesn't want that coming out and then anybody thinking that she's leaving because of whoever wins the Conservative leadership. That's going to be announced on Saturday. She says she will stay and support whoever wins the leadership. She will support the party going forward, but that after 14 years and a lot of ups, a lot of downs, and a lot of time in between, and especially these last 7 months, she says it's time to write the next chapter in her life.
Candice Bergen took on the role as interim opposition leader following the ousting of Erin O'Toole. And coming up later in our program, Brian Lilly will also discuss if he believes Pierre Poilievre will take the CPC leadership on the first ballot. The party will choose its new leader on Saturday. With summer now over for students, that means a new chapter of their lives is just beginning. Lethbridge College and the University of Lethbridge each held new student orientation sessions on Tuesday to welcome back students. Video journalist Micah Quinn has the story of the thousands of students who are now ready to begin the grind of a new school year.
Students from Lethbridge College took the important next steps in their careers as they came down to participate in the new student orientation on Tuesday morning. Classes don't officially start until Wednesday, but staff from the college say over 1,000 students registered for the day, and it's a great way for students to ease their way into post-secondary life.
We have program orientations going on, campus tours, and a complimentary barbecue, as well as a bunch of booths set up in Centre Core for students to interact with some of our services that we have on campus.
Over 5,000 students, including more than 2,300 new students, have registered for the fall 2022 semester at Lethbridge College. Students say they're excited for the new semester, but there are also mixed emotions on their first day.
It's really rewarding as myself. As I was coming in, I was really nervous, feeling the students' energy, and it's really rewarding to be able to assist the students and making them feel comfortable and welcome and kind of ease the nerves a little bit. I know what it's like to be a new student.
Oh, it's been awesome. It's been such a great energy out here. Just tons of people here to have fun, and yeah, a really positive, supportive environment today, so I'm happy to be a part of it for sure.
Meanwhile, at the University of Lethbridge, new student orientation was also taking place. Just under 1,000 students are moving into residences this fall, with a 96% capacity. Staff from the U of L say it's great to be able to return to in-person classes following the struggles of the pandemic.
The opportunity to come back and know that they're going to be learning in person, really get to feel the campus, see the campus, experience the campus, it sets them up for success in understanding that this is where their learning will be happening, and it starts to build that excitement a little bit because we've been living through some very uncertain times.
There are currently no public health measures in Alberta, but staff from Lethbridge College say masking is required for the Wellness Centre, including all visits with on-campus physicians and when Wellness Centre visitors are displaying signs of illness. Proof of vaccination is also no longer required. At the University of Lethbridge, staff say it is a mask-friendly environment, and vaccinations will also not be required for students. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Ottawa's recommendation that farmers in Canada cut fertilizer use by 30% is not sitting well with many in our rural communities. Stuart Boovey, who is a dairy farmer and chair of Alberta Milk, says if producers cut their fertilizer consumption by that much, the price of milk will be going up.
It's really handy to go after fertilizer, and they're actually going after fertilizer emissions, which are not even measured, right? And say, well, we're going to cut fertilizer use by 30%. Well, as a farmer, that's a unique challenge, but I'll tell you right now, that will increase prices. The reason fertilizer gets used is it's an efficient way to grow more feed per acre. That's what it is. So if you say you want to use less, that's fine, but then the cost per acre goes up, which translates right into a higher cost of milk in my industry.
Stuart Boovey, the chair of Alberta Milk, will talk more about the state of Canada's dairy industry coming up after business news. Parks Canada has been working to restore West Slope cutthroat trout in Banff National Park. Up to 5,000 small fish have been released into Hidden Lake in the backcountry near the Lake Louise Ski Resort.
So we're at Hidden Lake in Banff National Park, and today we're just finishing some work to reintroduce West Slope cutthroat trout into this lake. We have some eggs that we put into the lake about 3 weeks ago. They're almost fully mature, and we are just about to release them down into the creek and the lake over the next few days. West Slope cutthroat trout are threatened in Alberta, and they're one of the fish that belongs in Banff National Park. They used to be in this lake, and about 50 years ago, brook trout were introduced into this lake and extinguished the cutthroat. And a super important part of Parks Canada's mandate is to protect species at risk, and so we're in the process of putting the species back where it used to be in Banff.
The Saskatchewan government says it is putting more than $13 million into improving provincial parks. Parks, Culture and Sport Minister Laura Ross says campers and day-use visitors are always top of mind when it comes to investing in park facilities and infrastructure improvements. She says renovations will be done to the docks, washrooms, day-use facilities and signage. Ross says there will also be a new campground service center set up at various provincial parks across Saskatchewan. A mother of 2 kids in Vancouver is offering her little hobbit hole to anyone who needs to spend some time alone. It sits on the corner of Marine Drive and Balaclava Street and is 8 feet long, 6 feet wide, and around 6 feet tall.
For some reason, I thought I should have a hobbit house. So I asked my husband to build me one. with the intention of pulling it out onto the boulevard and doing cosplay and just silly little things out there on the corner as I do. But he made it super solid, and now it's too heavy. So now I can't roll it out onto the boulevard. So now I have a she shed, which I am definitely going to use for writing, because I like to write, but also for getting away from my family. I love my family. I love my kids. I love my husband. I love my dogs. But sometimes I just want to be alone. I just wanted it to be very clean, very tidy, no clutter. There's no bathroom. There's no running water. There's no Wi-Fi. There's I can run an extension cord from the house, and there is for winter time there's a little fake fireplace that is a heater, so there will be ambiance, and you can plug in your laptop or whatever and work offline, whatever, or a book. Just bring a book, just sit and read or knit. So I wanted it to be a calm space, and I know if I need that, there's other people in this neighborhood that need that space.
Kind of reminds me a bit of those tiny homes. What a great idea. The shortage of food, fuel, and medicine is being felt in many regions of the world, including in Lebanon. The Christian charity Help the Persecuted is doing its part to help feed so many who are struggling, especially with how the war in Ukraine is not allowing grain shipments to make their way into Beirut.
While the scale of the economic crisis in Lebanon has reached unprecedented levels, with massive shortages of food, fuel, electricity and medicines, Christian charity Help the Persecuted is bringing seeds of hope to the country, including through a major agricultural project that will enable them to feed literally thousands of people. Speaking from a farm on the outskirts of Beirut, Help the Persecuted CEO and President Joshua Youssef explains more about their response to this crisis.
Greetings from Lebanon. I'm here at our Help the Persecuted farm in the outskirts of Beirut, where we have set up 11 greenhouses producing all assortment of vegetation. We currently now produce 35 truckloads a month worth of vegetables. This is going to feed thousands of people around the Lebanon area, in the greater Beirut area. What's happened here is catastrophic. You're looking at 40% unemployment. 80% of the population are malnourished. The valuation of the lira, the Lebanese lira, has plummeted. This country is in an economic crisis, and through our Help the Persecuted crisis response, we've been able to do projects like this farm and projects where we actually deliver meals to people and emergency relief kits.
And these 11 greenhouses will enable their field response team to open multiple job opportunities to the persecuted community, giving families food, a livelihood and a purpose. Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
That is so wonderful to see. Also wonderful to see that it was slightly cooler here in Lethbridge today, and if you've been praying for rain, your prayers may be answered later this week. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. Well, it was nice that we enjoyed slightly cooler temperatures across much of southwestern Alberta today. Tonight, expect some clouds to roll in with a low near 11. Wednesday, partly cloudy with a high near 33. Thursday, expect clouds and showers with the mercury dropping to 16. Friday, even more rain developing with a high of only 16 degrees again. Saturday, a high pressure system returns, bringing more sunshine with a high near 22. Even hotter on Sunday with a high expected near 30. Cooling off slightly Monday with a daytime high near 26 expected for Lethbridge. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 22 degrees with an average low of 7. The record high was 34 set back in 1998, and the record low was a chilly -1 back in 1948. The sun rose at 6:54 and set at 8:05. Let's see how Wednesday is shaping up across the country now. Expect sunshine at 21 in Victoria, just a few clouds and 20 degrees for Vancouver. Mainly sunny and 29 for Calgary. Overcast and 20 degrees for Edmonton on Wednesday. Sunshine and 33 is on tap for Regina. Mainly sunny and 30 for Saskatoon. Expect a clear sky and 27 degrees in Winnipeg. Over in the central part of the country, expect light showers and 25 in Toronto. Sunshine at 25 as well for Ottawa. Mainly sunny and 26 degrees for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, a partly cloudy day is in the forecast and 23 for both Fredericton and Halifax. Just a few clouds and 22 for Charlottetown. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect periods of drizzle and a high of only 15 degrees on Wednesday. Michigan's chief law enforcement officer wants to appeal the judge's decision to keep the Line 5 pipeline dispute in federal court. Attorney General Dana Nessel suggested a district court judge made errors in her ruling last month. Michigan may have a better chance of success if the dispute involving Calgary-based Enbridge was moved back to state court. Imperial Oil says it has struck a deal with Air Products from Pennsylvania to supply hydrogen for its proposed renewable diesel complex near Edmonton. The U.S. gas company will supply hydrogen to Imperial Strathcona refinery via pipeline from a hydrogen facility in its building near Edmonton. Air Products says it will boost its overall investment to $1.6 billion in the Edmonton facility. It will then send half of its output of hydrogen per day to Imperial when it opens in 2024. Imperial says its renewable diesel complex will be the largest facility of its kind in Canada, producing more than 1 billion litres per year of low-carbon diesel fuel. Bed Bath & Beyond has named its chief accounting officer, Laura Crossan, as interim CFO following the death of Gustavo Arnal. The home goods retailer says that Crossan will continue as its principal accounting officer while serving in the interim role. Arnal died on Friday, just days after the company announced it would close stores and lay off workers. He was also facing a lawsuit accusing him of taking part in a scheme to inflate the company's stock price to sell shares for a huge profit. The amount of non-mortgage debt owed by Canadians is on the rise. According to a new report by Equifax Canada, the average Canadian now owes $21,128. That is up 2.4% compared with the second quarter a year earlier. Analysts say the increase in debt was boosted by new lending and high spending linked to inflation. Equifax said credit card balances rose to the highest level since the fourth quarter of 2019. The average balance on credit cards for Canadians is now $5,800. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 182 points on the day to finish at 19,088. The Dow was down 173 points to 31,145. The S&P 500 was down 16 points to 3908, and the Nasdaq was down 85 on the day to 11,544. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up a cent to 86.88 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 64 cents to 8.15 US. Gold was down 20 cents to 17.0194 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 18.02 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.02 per bushel, barley's at $8.16, canola's at $18.07, and corn is at $11.63 per bushel. Live cattle were up 50 cents to $145.05. Feeder cattle October contract was up $1.15 to $186.10, and lean hogs October contract was up $1.08 to $91.10. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 76.03 US. Recapping one of our top stories, 11 people are now dead and 19 others were injured following a stabbing spree that began at the James Smith Cree Nation and spread to nearby Weldon in Saskatchewan. The latest death is 31-year-old Damien Sanderson, who is one of the suspects police were looking for. Police are still searching for his brother, 30-year-old Miles Sanderson, who was a suspect in the attacks. The federal Conservatives will be choosing their new leader on Saturday. Can anything derail the Pierre Poilievre train for the CPC leadership? Political reporter Brian Lilly will give us his thoughts next. And listen, if you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. We'd love to hear from you.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Are you going through divorce or separation? Find support and encouragement at Divorce Care beginning September 13th at 7 p.m. at City Light Church. Divorce Care is a weekly meeting held every Tuesday, and it's a place where you'll find a warm, caring environment during a difficult season of your life. For more information, visit divorcecare.org or call the City Light Church office at 403-329-3011. Big Brothers Big Sisters in Lethbridge is looking for volunteers to mentor children and youth in their various programs. Volunteers commit to one visit per week for 1 year. They have many kids that are looking for a big brother or sister. Make a difference in a child's life and start something big. To apply, visit lethbridge.bigbrothersbigsisters.ca, and for more information, call 403-328-9355. And that's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The woman who has led the Conservative Party for the past 7 months, Candace Bergen, says she will not be seeking re-election. Now, to talk about this in more detail is our political reporter, Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, you had a long chat with Ms. Bergen. Why is she deciding to step away from the public life?
Well, after 14 years, she thinks it's time. Now, she also wanted to make sure that she got this news out that she won't be running in the next election before the leadership vote is announced. She doesn't want that coming out and then anybody thinking that she's leaving because of whoever wins the Conservative leadership. That's going to be announced on Saturday. She says she will stay and support whoever wins the leadership. She will support the party going forward, but that after 14 years and a lot of ups, a lot of downs, and a lot of time in between, and especially these last 7 months, she says it's time to write the next chapter in her life. And look, she's had some great accomplishments, from shepherding through the bill to do away with the long gun registry. She told me that one of her proudest moments was passing Bill S2, which was the bill that gave matrimonial property rights to women on the reserves. You know, a right that any woman in the rest of Canada would have. Women on reserve didn't have until 2013, and she said passing that was something that gave her great pride. And so at this point in her life, in her career, after 14 years, she says, well, time for something else. She won't commit to sticking around until the next election. I think if the election doesn't come until 2025, she might bow out a little bit earlier. If the election comes earlier, she'll stay till then and then have somebody else represent Portage Lisgar.
Now, today is the last day for ballots to be counted for the CPC leadership. Last week, we were hearing it was around 50% of ballots that were cast. What are you hearing now?
So, yeah, the party came out with that statement saying about 50%. Now, that would be surprisingly low. They normally get 65% voter turnout, but that was before the last weekend. But then on Tuesday morning, I was told, well, no, it wasn't 50%. It was more like we were tracking towards 50%. But, you know, let me get back to you. The latest number I was given, it was 411,000 ballots cast out of the 675,000 members. Wow. That works out to 61%. So that's in line with historical numbers. If it was below 50%, then we might be sitting there saying, okay, lots of different scenarios could play out here depending on where that 50% came from. At 61%, I think people's perceptions of where this race is headed are probably accurate at this point, but anything can happen.
Now, we keep hearing and reading on social media, Brian, that a large number of Liberal supporters bought CPC memberships so that they could specifically vote for Jean Charest and not Pierre Poilievre. And these rumors are not going away. Any truth to these rumblings?
I really doubt that that's a major factor here. I know that that sprung up again over the weekend because Christy Clark, who was BC Premier and leader of the Liberal Party there, said that. Look, the Liberal Party in BC is like the UCP or the Sask Party. It's named Liberal. They're actually looking at changing their name because it doesn't reflect it. They don't match the federal Liberals at all. They're the Free Market Coalition Party who battles it out with the NDP. Gordon Campbell was the previous leader of that party before Christy Clark and previous premier. He came from the Conservative side of that coalition, but Christy Clark definitely came from the Liberal side. She said she bought a membership. There's not going to be that many people. And when you look at the membership sales numbers, Pierre Poilievre said he sold 311,000 and change. Jean Charest would only say he sold tens of thousands. Patrick Brown, who's no longer in the race, sold about 150,000. You know, there aren't enough Liberals doing that to change the outcome of this race, which most people still expect will go to Pierre Poilievre when the announcement comes on Saturday.
Brian, a number of political pundits say Pierre Poilievre could win the federal Conservative leadership on the first ballot. And as you mentioned, card-carrying members will choose the new leader on Saturday. Can anything whatsoever derail the Poilievre train?
Look, there's always a possibility. Like I said, it depends on where votes are cast. You know, I've had some people tell me, well, Poilievre isn't as strong in Quebec or Atlantic Canada. You know, Charest could surprise people in Ontario. When Charest put out his path to victory a few weeks ago, it was a very narrow path that required him to get 50% of the points in Ontario. That is a heavy lift. It required him to get 75% of the points in Quebec. I've had people who oppose Poilievre winning tell me that, and these are people who would know, people who have run these sorts of campaigns before, they expect him to win with over 50% of the points in every province on the first ballot. If he doesn't win on the first ballot, I've said from the beginning, it will depend on where he lands. The experts in this complicated system say anything below 45% becomes very difficult to win if you don't get that on the first ballot. So if he wins on the first ballot, great. If he doesn't, it depends on where he lands. We're kind of like in the movie Dumb and Dumber, where you're saying you're saying there's a chance. Yeah, there's a chance. Might be slim, but there's a chance, an unlikely one at that.
So, Brian, let's look beyond the CPC leadership for just a moment here. You've said in the past that we could have a fall election. How's the battle really shaping up between the Trudeau Liberals and potentially a Pierre Poilievre-led Conservative Party?
Well, I think for most of the public, the idea that Poilievre's going to be the leader or is the leader is probably baked in. So I'm not going to expect any significant leadership bounce. That could happen. It hasn't for the past couple of leadership races. The polls over the weekend showed some interesting things. An Abacus data poll put the two parties tied. I think it was 32% for the Conservatives, 31% for the Liberals. That's a statistical tie. That is within the margin of error. An Ipsos poll just out today talks about the fact that Poilievre's very popular with the Conservative base, but not as popular with the general public, those outside of the party who he needs to win. So you look at those two things, neither the Liberals nor the Conservatives really in a position to form a majority. They'd be battling it out for a minority. Poilievre has to find a way, if he wants to win and the next election, which he absolutely can, he's got to find a way to attract the swing voters without alienating some of the people that he's attracted who see any sort of compromise as selling out and, will abandon him. It's that constant battle within the Conservatives. Do you want to be a party that is 100% principled and absolutely right on everything, but not get power? Or do you want to put a bit of water in your wine to attract the people over here who are open to voting for you, but want to see a bit of compromise? That's going to be the challenge, and that's what the polling is showing right now. Look, I've said from the beginning, in a battle between Justin Trudeau and Pierre Poilievre, either one could win. It would come down to what sort of campaign each party would run.
You wrote over the Labor Day long weekend, Brian, that you think the Liberals are trying to give Prime Minister Justin Trudeau a new look ahead of the Conservative leader being announced. What makes you say that?
Just his schedule, the different tone. After he came back from his vacation in Costa Rica, we didn't see him for 2 weeks. That's actually often good for politicians, not to be seen, not to be in the headlines. Chrétien famously hated being in the news cycle all the time because he said people don't want to see the prime minister's face all the time. Trudeau's always loved the limelight. So he takes this 2-week vacation in Costa Rica, comes back, he hosts the German chancellor. For the most part, that was not a great visit, but there are lots of photos and TV images of him out there with another world leader touring Canada. That's as much of the news as a lot of low information swing voters would get from that. Next, he's with the NATO Secretary General touring Canada again in the Arctic at Cold Lake. Then he's dropping in unexpectedly. He drops in on Ontario Premier Doug Ford for a meeting. He asked for that meeting. Did the same thing in Manitoba with Premier Heather Stephenson. So that's kind of got me thinking about it. And then I talked to some people, looked at the rest of his calendar. He's got a lot of international events going on. He's going to be hosting the president of the European Commission here in Canada. He's going to be going to the United Nations General Assembly, the state funeral later this month for Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. All of that's going on. So, yeah, I think they're trying to reframe him, which every leader, every party does every once in a while when they've been in the public eye for a bit. You got to freshen them up. I think they're trying to freshen him up and position him as a statesman up against this newcomer, Poilievre.
But what about the rumors that keep popping up saying that Trudeau may no longer lead the Liberals into the next election, that we may see somebody like Chrystia Freeland, former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney, or even the current Trade Minister, François-Philippe Champagne?
Well, I'll say this about Mark Carney. I don't think he's going to jump in. And if you want to set off all kinds of people who are convinced that there's a globalist conspiracy Then you elect Mark Carney, the former Goldman Sachs banker, former Bank of England governor, former Bank of Canada governor, as your leader. And he spent most of his career outside of Canada. They could just do what they did to Michael Ignatieff with him. I don't think it's a good choice. And I don't think Carney, he's a very, very smart man. I think his policies are wrong on a lot of things, but I don't think he's going to jump in. I'm continually hearing now, Hal, that Chrystia Freeland doesn't actually want it, that she may do like Candice Bergen and leave by the next election. That, you know, she's reached for the brass ring. She's deputy PM, but may want to step back after some very, very difficult and intense years. So then that leaves François-Philippe Champagne, that leaves Mélanie Joly, Anita Anand, a whole list of people. If it changes, if the Liberal leader changes, then the whole calculus of how you run a campaign, I would say, changes as well, because Champagne is very different than Trudeau. You know, someone like Chrystia Freeland would be tied directly to Trudeau. They've worked so closely together. Champagne could rebrand himself. Mélanie Joly could perhaps rebrand herself as not being that tied to Trudeau. So it would change things dramatically, but don't go with the easy assumption that it'll be Chrystia Freeland or Mark Carney if Trudeau does step away.
A new luxury tax took effect last week, Brian. Now it's an extra 10% tax on cars and planes over $100,000 and boats over $250,000. Yeah, I wish. What was the rationale behind this tax, and what will the impact really be?
Well, the rationale is that what the Liberals always say, that the rich should pay their fair share, and the implication there is that they don't. I'd like to know what their fair share is, because I've been looking at this for years, and people will say, well, the 1% don't pay any tax. Actually, they pay about, I think the last time I checked, about 20% of all taxes, income taxes at the federal and provincial level in this country. So, you know, you can't say they're not paying their fair share. But this is the government looking for new revenue tools, as Liberals like to call them. The Parliamentary Budget Office looked at this. They said that the tax would actually have a negative economic impact in terms of billions of dollars of lost economic activity, because people would not buy these items, or they'd buy them elsewhere outside of Canada.
Right.
And so dealerships would lose out, manufacturers would lose out. There's one boat manufacturer from the Okanagan Valley, Campion. They've closed down shop and they're headed for Texas, because they say we're tired of constantly being picked on and bombarded. The people who get hurt by that, they're not the millionaires buying the $250,000 boat. It's the guy working on the line, building the boat, the artisan, the craftsman, the tradesman, the dealerships that were selling the boats, that sort of thing. It's been a messy rollout, and I think it will hurt rather than help. But it gets the Liberals to engage in class warfare, which they definitely seem to like to do.
Now, Brian, we recently discussed the Trudeau Liberals giving $133,000 for an anti-racism program, but it turns out the guy running the campaign was a racist, allegedly. Now, the feds are promising new vetting techniques, but you say there's kind of a fresh new angle here that makes things even worse?
Yeah, it's a fellow that they picked to go on the panel to decide how the media bailout money, which is, by the way, mostly for print, it's not for broadcasters, that's another story. This $595 million, they appointed this guy who went to one of the sessions run by Leif Maruth and the Community Media Advocacy Center and said that Canadians live in a realm of white supremacy. Wait, what a minute. Like the guy helping decide how to dole out that money believes that the entire Canadian society is run on white supremacy. We need a complete overhaul on these anti-racism programs that seem to spread more racism or wacky political ideas that are driven by far left ideology. It's not about ending racism. It's a far left ideology. We are paying for people to push their politics in these seminars, which are given to civil servants and employees that don't have a choice but to go to them. And, you know, it's costing us a lot of money to rip at the fabric of our society rather than heal. You know, I'll be the first to say racism exists in this country. And should the government be doing things to combat it? Yes. But what they've been doing so far is the wrong thing. And this is just the latest example.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
Well, here in southern Alberta, agriculture is the order of the day and naturally impacts every family in the region. Dairy farming is lesser known and talked about than some more visible ag sectors, but we wanted to check in with a local dairy farmer who's also the chair of Alberta Milk, Stuart Boovey. Thanks so much for joining us today from Barnwell, Alberta, all the way out in Barnwell.
Good morning.
Great to have you on. Okay, so Stuart, we hear a lot about ranching and feedlots around here, of course. So in your mind, what sets dairy farms apart from cattle operations?
Well, generally a different breed, first of all. It tends to be Holstein. There is also Jerseys and other breeds in southern Alberta, but it tends to be Holstein. So that would be one thing. The other one is, there are lesser numbers, I would say. There's about 150 dairies in southern Alberta, 490 in all of Alberta. So that, like you say, a little bit lesser on public perception-wise, I suppose. But I guess that would, and we're definitely a different industry as far as genetics and livestock.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so would you say that there's a need for more dairy farms in Canada?
Not more dairy farms, I would say, no. Production is, before COVID was always going up. The last 2 years it's leveled off, just because of consumer demand and consumer issues. So right now, milk production in Canada is basically, it's growing at about 1 to 2% per year. That's what it averages.
Wow. Okay, so at the very basics, what does Alberta Milk do and who does it serve?
So Alberta Milk is a producer driven industry. So I've been a producer my entire life. I've been in this current location for 27 years. So the board of directors is made up of all producers. You have to be a producer to be on the board. Alberta Milk, what it does, it does many things. One of it is it's actually it coordinates milk receiving, milk quality, transporting milk to producers, raw milk to processors, I should say. Takes care of on-farm animal care. It does many, many things, but it's a producer-run organization.
Wow. Okay, so the dairy farming in southern Alberta, would you say that it's more of a multi-generational family business, or are they owned by large corporations? What are we looking at here?
It very much tends to be multi-generational, stay in the family type business. That's certainly my roots. My father started in the 1960s in BC. That's very, very typical. Some of the farms, I know there's one west of Lethbridge, has been over 100 years in business. It really tends to stay in the family just because it really affects your life, I guess, is what I would say. It's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If you're not born into it, you'd probably look and go, why would I want a dairy farm? But if you're born into it, it has a different draw to you, I guess, is what it is. And then, of course, in southern Alberta, we also have the Hutterites that quite a few of them have dairies as well, which is obviously multi-generational and doesn't move, obviously. So
Definitely. So are you then moving your milk into other organizations that maybe then produce cheese, or is that all one and the same of the dairy industry?
So currently in Western Canada, we don't have a large cooperative. So what Alberta Milk does is coordinates milk transport to processors. So in Canada, there's 3 major processors, and then there's a myriad of smaller ones and some on-farm processing and other things. But the 3 major ones take about 75 to 80% of the milk produced in Canada, and that's also in Alberta. Currently in Alberta, we're a little bit short of processing. So sometimes some of our milk goes east or west, depending on the day and the week. And we coordinate with other milk boards in Western Canada to take that milk. That's obviously, we work very well with our other Western milk boards, and we work nationally as well. But certainly on milk processing, we work as a Western group, the 4 Western provinces. So what we do is about a month to 2, hopefully a month in advance, we have all the loads of milk destined for their processor. There's processor orders, and then we fill them. So that's how dairying works. So as producers, we do not process our own milk. We sell it to processors.
Okay, there you go. You answered my question. I was always kind of curious about that. Now, in this industry, you hear of something called the quota system. So maybe explain why this is important to dairy farming families and Canadian consumers, and maybe also how the quota system works.
So it's fascinating that how you asked the question. Actually, dairying around the world is on a quota system. Actually, if you really get down to it, here the reason it gets named differently in Canada is it was put in place in the 1960s, and it's actually run by the CDC, the Canadian Dairy Commission. So it's actually federal, and that's what differentiates us from other countries in the world. Most dairy systems, I would say, in the world now are run by the processor. That the processor wants so much milk, and they contract, which is the same as quota. It's just a different name. But anyways, going back to Canada, quota is just a producer can buy from another producer a market share is what it is. So that's actually the whole name. It's market share quota. And what you do is say like my own farm, I have a quota that's basically through Alberta Milk, and I have a certain deliverable amount of milk that I'm allowed to produce in a day. And that's transferred farmer to farmer. And that's what they call the quota. Now, what Alberta Milk does is if I would want to sell my quota, I would put it on the market and another producer could buy it. The only thing fascinating about quota is that the provincial boards actually control it. So if the market gets bigger, like I mentioned to you before, if it gets 2% bigger, then there's 2% more quota that can go into the system. That is not sold. That's distributed amongst producers, or we start new producers. So that's how that all works, and that's all mandated to the provincial boards, and that's one of the things that the provincial board does do.
Wow.
Is we have a general manager and staff that deal with producer issues on that level. But that's all mandated through federal legislation, and that's why sometimes we're targeted because it's a federal thing, and there's long-standing agreements, interprovincially and things like that.
Lots of red tape, I'm sure.
Yeah. Which we're very much working on, trying to eliminate some of the red tape, just because it becomes onerous. So
a little bit cumbersome, I would imagine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But it's fascinating that in other jurisdictions and other countries, it's very similar. It just doesn't have it doesn't have the same reputation for whatever reason. I'm not sure why, but anyway.
Interesting. Okay, well, you mentioned other countries. So there has been talk of countries like the US and New Zealand wanting to get their products into our markets. But is this a good idea for Canadians?
Well, COVID taught us a few things. One is supply chains. So the downside with milk is if you want to move it long distances, it becomes really tough to do because milk is a perishable product. So it becomes very, very tricky to move milk long distances. That's why in Canada, milk is produced in all 10 provinces, just because, it seems like a great idea when things are going well. But when you get a supply chain problem, which COVID did, and other things can bring it on, weather, anything. So bringing from other countries, while it seems like a good idea, is much more difficult than it actually seems.
Yeah, I can't imagine any benefit to having dairy products come in from New Zealand or someplace else when they can be produced right here at home.
For sure. And what it is we've mentioned a little bit about the Canadian Dairy Commission. It gets targeted because we have pricing set nationally, and the U.S. targets that because our return comes only from the marketplace. So I only make money from what the consumers pay. Other jurisdictions tend to have all sorts of programs which are not from the price of milk, but they have other programs that get money into the hands of producers, and that's where it gets murky and it gets tricky, and why you get trade deals and trade negotiations that while we can produce milk cheaper, where are you making your money? Is basically it gets when you get into the details, and it gets very complicated.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I mean, we've heard too that U.S. lobbyists are proposing that Canadians would pay less for their dairy products. But is that just their way to lobby to open up a new market?
Absolutely. It's absolutely what it is. Because what happens is, and we've just seen it even in COVID, I mean, I'm sure you're aware in the Fraser Valley, also they were shorted with milk just because the farms were flooded and and then there was COVID issues on trying to haul milk interprovincially. Well, they tried to get milk out of the US. It was 50% higher than the Canadian price.
Okay.
So it's just fascinating that they want to open the market up, and then once you've eliminated Canadian dairies, your milk price would be actually much higher.
Oh, wow. I'm just curious too, how different is the U.S. dairy product to what's produced in Canada? Is there a difference?
Well, they have some different rules that they adhere to. Something on quality, they are allowed to have somewhat poorer quality. I wouldn't say it is poor, but they're allowed to. So there's that difference. Our regulations are much tighter, which I'm very much in favor of. Even as a producer, I think we need to make sure that our quality is of the highest standard rather than even mediocre. I want to use the right word. I wouldn't, not high quality, I guess.
Of course. So what makes the Canadian product more high quality then?
We have regulations as far as bacteria levels and stuff like that in the raw milk that are more strict than other jurisdictions. Okay. Even though I would say the majority of the milk is nowhere near limits, like the high limit, it's still allowed. So that's one difference. The other one is they are allowed to use growth hormone in the U.S. that we are not allowed to use in Canada. So that's an animal that's been restricted for probably 20 years already, and at least 20, close to 25, I guess, in Canada. It is illegal to use in Canada. So we're not allowed to use it on our dairy animals. So that's another difference.
And when it comes to feed for your dairy cattle, how much of an impact does the type of feed have on maybe taste of the product? I know with eggs, like in the US, you'll see the yolks are more yellow than in Canada. They're almost an orangey color, and it's because they're corn-fed compared to wheat-fed. Is there anything similar with cattle and with milk, with dairy cows?
It certainly can be affected. I know, like I said, I have a long history in the dairy industry. I know my parents, they would feed, waste like cauliflower or things like that, and you will taste that right away. But now, because of just the size of farms, we tend to grow our own feed, or certainly some of it. So most cows are fed a pretty similar ration, I would say, as far as, in southern Alberta, I feed alfalfa. In, say, British Columbia, where I'm originally from, they feed grass just because of the climate. But then most cows, most dairy animals in Canada, I would say, get silage, corn as well. So that really makes the milk taste pretty much the same.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting.
Well, and again, back to our processing end, obviously we have to work with our industry stakeholders, with our processors. And of course, they like the same across Canada if they could get it, right? So I would say you would have to be a pretty picky dairy eater to notice the difference on milk taste across Canada. I'm not saying that, maybe there's places in the world that it would taste different, but I'd say in Canada, it pretty much tastes the same.
Okay. So the feds right now are proposing fertilizer restrictions. Would this affect dairy farming at all?
Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
And how?
Yeah. This might be a long answer, so but
brace myself.
Brace yourself, yeah. It's really handy to go after fertilizer, and they're actually going after fertilizer emissions, which are not even measured, right? And say, well, we're going to cut fertilizer use by 30%. Well, as a farmer, that's a unique challenge, but I'll tell you right now, that will increase prices. The reason fertilizer gets used is it's an efficient way to grow more feed per acre. That's what it is. So if you say you want to use less, that's fine. But then the cost per acre goes up, which translates right into a higher cost of milk in my industry.
Okay, and then the consumer will probably feel that in the end.
For sure.
Oh, right when inflation is hitting us all too. Well,
and the problem with, and I understand, I've personally had meetings with the federal environment minister, who was certainly, very much in favor of restricting fertilizer use or whatever. But the problem is that they go by world numbers and by about emissions, which is a dangerous game to play. Because I would agree that we should limit fertilizer emissions. Doesn't mean you have to limit fertilizer use. You just got to make sure it all gets used properly, which is, easy to say and a little bit more difficult to do. While you need farmers involved, is really what, that's what I do. That's my whole career, is trying to make, okay, you want us to use less fertilizer and emit less, we'll figure out a way to do it. Don't worry, because, fertilizer is expensive.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for that insight. Really appreciate it. Looks like we are about out of time, but we really appreciated having you on today, Stuart.
Anytime.
Absolutely. That was Stuart Booby, the chair of Alberta Milk. I'm Jeanette Roche. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.